So today we're going to go over how to set up the Miller XMT machines. We're going to be doing shielded metal arc welding, otherwise known as arc welding. There's two pieces of equipment that we need to plug into here. First one is going to be our ground cable. The second one is going to be our electrode holder. So I'll show you how we plug these two things in. So we'll go down to the machine and we'll set these things up. So for the first thing, the electrode holder, we got two ports that these things are going to plug into. This is a little DINS connector. It's a quick connector. We can swap back and forth. This Miller machine is a multi-process machine, so we can do a lot of different things with it. But the way we want to set this stuff up is on DC electrode positive. For most of the welds that we're going to be doing, 6011 rod, 7018 rod, this is where we want to be. It's going to give us a hot burn. It's going to give us what we need. So to put this thing in, you basically slide it in. There's a little notch on those. You twist and you lock those in place. We grab our ground clamp as well. So with our ground clamp, it's the same thing. It's got a little DINS connector. You can see that little notch right there. That's where we're going to actually slide in. On this one, we're going to be on the negative. This is going to give us DC electrode positive. So our electrode is going to go into our electrode holder, and that's going to give us the positive. It's going to give us more heat. It's going to give us a higher burn through, and it's going to be what we want. So the last things that we really need to kind of worry about, okay, is obviously getting these things on. You're going to be holding the electrode holder. The ground clamp needs to go onto the table somewhere. If you get a good clamp, things will work fine. We'll get this cord out of the way. And then the last thing that we need to do, if we flip down this cover, you can see we have a little dial indicator here, and this dial is going to be used for the different processes. On this, we want to just do stick welding. Stick welding is, the term that we use for shielded metal arc welding. Once that's there, we don't really have to mess with anything. We can mess with our arc control. I like to just leave those at 50. Once you get some experience, then we work with that. Once we have that, we'll make sure our electrode holder is not touching our table right here. And what we'll go ahead and do is we'll flip this power switch on. Sometimes it takes a second. Now you can see that we have this machine set up. We can set our amperage on this stuff. It is a constant current machine, meaning we are going to be adjusting our amperage, and that's where the machine is going to try to hold that at. We'll go ahead and we will show you how we set up the rod and show you some welding shots. Okay, so when we are welding, the first things that we're going to start off with is just doing a little bead, which is running a weld right across the metal there. There's a couple things we want to be kind of aware of. One, there are two angles that this rod is going to be held at, okay? One of those angles is going to be your end view angle, so looking at the end, and the other one is going to be your side view angle, so you're looking at the side of this. To be able to do this, what you want to do is you want to hold on the end view angle, okay, on a flat position weld like this, you want to hold it at a 90-degree angle. You don't want to tilt it one way or the other way, okay? Again, that's as you're looking at this weld, you don't want this thing tilting one way or the other. Now, when you're looking at the side view, what you want to look for is a 10 to 12 degree tilt in the direction of travel. So if I'm going to be traveling in this direction, I want to tilt this rod in this direction. If I'm going to start on this end, I want to tilt this thing in this direction there. So that's two factors that you got to worry about, okay, is your end view angle and your side view angle. 90 degrees on your end view, 10 to 12 degrees on your side view. That can vary a little bit. That's just kind of what the book says, but as you weld, you can kind of play with it and adjust it a little bit. The other factor that you're going to be worried about is going to be your arc gap. Your arc gap is the distance from the tip of this electrode to your metal there. And this thing, you need to have an arc gap about 1/8 of an inch. That is the thickness of the end of this bare rod right here. So that is the gap that you are going to be trying to hold this rod at as you are welding. What's going to happen is this rod is going to burn up, and you're going to have to constantly feed this down. It's really just a feel, getting an understanding, seeing how that stuff works. Okay, so your arc gap is your third thing that you got to worry about. And then the other thing, the last thing that we're really worried about is our travel speed, how fast we are moving forward. A lot of people at the very beginning, they tend to move very, very fast, okay? What you need to do is you need to try to slow down. You need to make sure that you build a puddle up. We're gonna get some arc shots so that way you can kind of see what that puddle's supposed to look like, and you can also determine the size by how wide that puddle is when you're welding. So we'll get some arc shots, we'll check these things out, and we'll do that. But the four things that you're really kind of worried about, the four things that you need to focus on is your end view angle, your side view angle, your arc gap, and then your travel speed. If you can get those things figured out, you're gonna be able to lay down a decent bead without any issues at all. Okay, so a couple of things that we have to think about is the type of rod that we're dealing with. We're gonna deal with what these things mean in another video, but for right now, we're just using a 6011 rod, pretty standard rod that you're gonna see. Inside of this electrode holder, there are grooves that are cut out. You can clamp these things in any kind of direction, whichever way that you want. You can clamp them that way, okay? I like to do a 90 degree, that's my personal preference. It's what feels comfortable to me. However you're gonna feel comfortable with it is kind of the key. Now my machine is off right now, so if I touch this table, no electricity is gonna flow. But once you get your electrode positioned, okay, there's a couple other things that we wanna kind of, figure out. One, you've got to understand how to start this arc from flowing. It doesn't automatically start flowing. If I hover this thing down over the table, it doesn't flow until I actually touch the table. So essentially what I need to do is I need to touch the table and I need to bring it up before it melts that stuff together and joins them and becomes one big mess. There's really two methods that we use for this. One is a tap method and the other one is a strike, kind of like a match. For me, in my experience, the scratch method is the easiest one, especially for beginners to start. If you try tapping it, sometimes it gets stuck. But in either case, you want to touch the table real quick and you want to bring this thing up. You need to maintain an arc gap of 1/8 of an inch. That doesn't mean you can't pull it up farther than that at the beginning, okay? But you've got to make sure that you get that arc started. If you pull it up too far when you start, it's going to break that arc and no electricity is going to be flowing. So once you get positioned, once you get on your metal, then you're going to be free to be able to actually take that and kind of hover. So on this table, you can see there's a lot of stuff all over. That's because we've been striking on them. There's practice tables. That's what they're designed for. We grind them down as they get bad. So what you're going to do is you're going to kind of hold this rod. You're going to scratch it kind of off on this table. You're going to bring it up to your metal. And you're going to maintain your end view, your side view, and your arc gap. And you're also going to be feeding this rod down because it's going to be burning as you're doing that. There's a couple ways and a couple techniques that I like to do. One, don't ever hover yourself like this because your arms are not going to be stable. It's a good idea to brace. I like to take my elbow and I like to put it up on the table. The nice thing with this is if I'm holding my electrode in this hand and I put my hand inside the other one, I can hold this thing. Notice how I have the ability to kind of pivot my arms and do any kind of motion that I want. The nice thing too is as I'm starting to burn this rod down, this hand's kind of dropping, and what's going to happen is as this thing feeds, I'm going to be able to drop my hand and be able to weld this thing all the way across without having to pick up my elbow and kind of move. Okay, that's where a lot of people make mistakes. They're either hovering here, okay, or they kind of weld and they move, and you're going to get all sorts of movements. This 6011 rod is going to show you every little movement that you make. It's a good training rod because you can see those mistakes, you can identify them, and hopefully you can correct them. And that's part of the evaluation process that we go through. So we'll go ahead and we'll get an arc shot set up and go from there. So in this shot, you're going to see we strike the arc, we bring the rod over to the metal, and we are going to be welding across. We're trying to maintain those angles that we have. This shot is a continuous shot. It doesn't speed up or slow down. This is the speed that you're going to do. It does take a little bit of time. It's not a very fast process. The piece of metal that we're welding over is a 4-inch piece of metal. So to give you a reference on how big it is, once you're done, you break that apart. In the next shot, you're going to see an end view angle, again striking the arc, bringing it over to the metal, and then you continue welding. You set this machine to 100 amps, which is just a good starting point. You can adjust it up or down depending on how you weld. At the end of this weld, you're going to notice there's some slag, which is formed from impurities in that weld floating to the top into
also the outer coating of that electrode that is running off. We'll talk about how we clean that slag off in the next part.
There's a couple tools that we're going to use when we are cleaning up the welds, because there is a slag that gets on the outside of them. So we have some tongs that we can use to grab the metal. We can cool it off in a bucket of water. We call that a quench tank. We've got a chipping hammer, and we've got a wire brush. So basically the way that we do this, especially if this metal is hot, what we want to do is you want to just take this chipping hammer. You're going to lightly tap. You got two different ends you can choose from. Once you kind of get a little chips, you can take your wire brush and we can kind of clean this off. You can kind of see in here, there's a little bit of slag on the edges. This chipping hammer that I have right here has kind of got a very blunt point. So maybe doesn't do the best job, but we can take this, clean those out, and then what we're left with is what we consider a cleaned weld. Now we can sit there, we can evaluate this. Again, we're going to do that in the next video. So now we've got a better chipping hammer, so we're going to test this out, see if this one works a little bit better. You'll notice I'm not sitting here just hammering on this thing. Okay, very light taps. That's really all you need to be able to clean this stuff off. There we have it, 3 different welds that we're going to be looking at. We'll evaluate these ones in the next video and determine what we like and what we don't like about each one.